A chilling silence of the pre-dawn hours often hides the most sinister truths, and in the heart of Detroit, Michigan, one such truth lay buried for decades, festering beneath a veneer of forgotten sorrow. It was a silence broken only by the whispers of the wind through broken window panes and the distant hum of the city, a city that had long borne witness to countless tragedies. This is the story of a darkness that lingered, a cold case that gripped a community, and an arrest that shattered every preconceived notion. How could an entire community be so utterly blind to the monster living among them? And what truly happened in the shadows of a fateful night that echoed for over 20 years? Join us as we unravel the intricate, heartbreaking tapestry of betrayal and long-awaited justice, a story that asks, can true evil ever truly hide? Before we dive into the abyssal depths of this narrative, tell us in the comments below, from where in the world are you witnessing this unfold? And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support fuels our ability to bring these haunting stories to light, helping us grow and share more tales like this one. The year was 1982, and the city of Detroit, though scarred by economic hardship and the lingering after-effects of the past, still pulsed with a vibrant, resilient spirit, particularly within its close-knit Black communities. In the heart of the Conant Gardens neighborhood, a quiet, tree-lined street named Elmo was home to Lena Mae Jackson, a woman whose warmth and unwavering kindness were as legendary as her Sunday pot roasts. At 63 years old, Lena Mae was not just a resident, she was an institution. A retired school teacher, her days were now filled with volunteering at the local church, tending to her prize-winning rose garden, and, most importantly, being the matriarchal anchor for a sprawling family and countless honorary grandchildren. Her small, impeccably kept bungalow, with its freshly painted porch and window boxes overflowing with geraniums, stood as a beacon of stability amidst the changing urban landscape. The scent of her homemade peach cobbler often wafted down the street, an inviting aroma that drew neighbors closer, a culinary invitation to comfort and camaraderie. Lena Mae embodied the very soul of Conant Gardens. She knew every child by name, their dreams, their struggles. She organized the annual street cleanups, arbitrated neighborhood squabbles with gentle wisdom, and was the first to arrive with a casserole in times of grief or illness. Her home was an unofficial community center, its doors always open, filled with the aroma of spices and the sound of laughter. She taught Sunday school, her lessons woven with parables of resilience and faith, inspiring generations. Her impact was immeasurable, not just as an individual, but as a living symbol of the community's shared values, integrity, compassion, and an unshakable belief in the power of collective support. The street, a mosaic of modest homes, vibrant gardens, and children playing hopscotch, felt safe, a sanctuary from the urban decay that gnawed at other parts of Detroit. The neighbors looked out for each other, shared porch talks, and gathered for impromptu cookouts. Lena Mae was the binding thread in this delicate tapestry, a woman whose quiet strength and moral compass guided them all. Her presence was so ingrained, so essential, that the thought of her absence was simply unfathomable. On the evening of Tuesday, October 12, 1982, the air was crisp, carrying the metallic scent of impending autumn rain. Lena Mae had spent the afternoon at the St. Jude Missionary Baptist Church, helping prepare for the annual Harvest Festival. She was last seen by her dear friend and fellow parishioner, Beatrice B. Washington, leaving the church around 7:15 p.m. Bea remembered Lena Mae humming a gospel hymn, her silhouette framed briefly against the setting sun as she walked towards her modest Chevrolet Impala. "See you tomorrow, Lena Mae," Bea had called out, waving. Lena Mae had smiled, a gentle, knowing smile, and returned the farewell. That smile, so full of life and promise, would be the last Bea, or indeed anyone outside of a killer, would ever see from her. The next morning, Wednesday, October 13th, the usual rhythm of Elmo Street was disturbed. Lena May, a creature of habit, had not arrived at the church by 9 a.m. to organize the prayer circle. This was highly unusual. Bea, a woman who rarely worried, felt a prickle of unease. By 10:30 a.m., after multiple unanswered phone calls to Lena May's home, Bea decided to walk the 3 blocks to check on her friend. As she approached the bungalow, the silence was palpable, almost oppressive. The front door was slightly ajar, a small detail that sent a jolt of fear through Bea's chest. Lena May was meticulously tidy, always locking her doors. Pushing the door open slowly, a faint creak echoing in the unnerving stillness, Bea stepped into the front hall. The house was immaculate, undisturbed, almost frozen in time, save for one chilling detail. Lena May's purse, usually kept on a small table by the door, was gone. Her car, the Impala, was still parked neatly in the driveway. The coffee pot sat cold on the counter, half filled with yesterday's brew. A half-eaten bowl of oatmeal, covered with plastic wrap, rested on the kitchen table, a silent testament to a morning ritual abruptly interrupted. Lena May Jackson had simply vanished. The Detroit Police Department was notified, and what began as a missing persons case quickly escalated into a full-scale investigation. Detectives Miles Corbin and Eleanor Ellie, seasoned veterans of the department, were assigned to the case. Corbin, a gruff but compassionate man in his late 40s, had seen the worst of humanity, while Vance, sharp and methodical, was in her early 30s, still burning with a youthful idealism that the job hadn't yet extinguished. They canvassed the neighborhood relentlessly, knocking on every door, their questions weaving a complex web of community life. Neighbors recalled Lena May's daily routine, her unblemished character, her lack of enemies. "Lena May wouldn't hurt a fly" was a common refrain, spoken with a mixture of disbelief and genuine affection. Children, their voices hushed, spoke of her comforting presence, the cookies she always had ready. The community was stunned, a collective dread settling over Conant Gardens like a thick, suffocating fog. Initial theories revolved around a robbery gone wrong. Detroit in the early 80s was grappling with high crime rates, and the thought of an elderly woman being targeted for her purse was not entirely far-fetched. However, the lack of forced entry, the undisturbed nature of the house, and the fact that the car was left behind seemed to contradict this. If it was a robbery, why take Lena May and nothing else of value? The detectives combed through Lena May's financial records, finding no unusual activity. Her savings account was modest, her pension deposited regularly. There was no secret stash, no hidden enemies, no desperate debts. She was, by all accounts, an open book. The search expanded. Missing posters with Lena May's kind, smiling face papered light poles in storefronts across the city. Volunteers from the church and community centers organized search parties, meticulously combing parks, abandoned buildings, and the overgrown banks of the Detroit River. The air grew colder with each passing day, and with it the hope in the hearts of those who loved Lena May. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and Lena May Jackson remained gone, a ghost in the collective memory of Conant Gardens. The case slowly, agonizingly began to gather dust, retreating into the cold files of unsolved mysteries. Detectives Corbin and Vance continued to chip away at it, re-interviewing witnesses, following up on every flimsy lead, but each path led to a dead end, each clue dissolved into ambiguity. The case became a torment for them, a shadow over their careers, a symbol of a promise unfulfilled. Vance, in particular, found herself haunted by Lena May's gentle smile, a constant reminder of the woman they couldn't bring home. Corbin and Vance, despite their unwavering dedication, found themselves battling against the limitations of 1980s forensic science and an increasingly desperate public. Every lead, no matter how remote, was pursued with grim determination. They interviewed known criminals in the area, explored connections to other unsolved disappearances, and even brought in psychics, a sign of their growing desperation. The absence of a body was the most crippling factor. Without it, the case lacked a tangible core. Without a crime scene in the traditional sense, without blood or a weapon, their investigation felt like grasping at smoke. Vance spent countless nights poring over witness statements, searching for the crack in the narrative, the overlooked detail that would blow the case open. Corbin, meanwhile, felt the weight of the community's expectations, their silent pleas for answers turning into frustrated whispers. The media, initially saturated with Lena May's story, slowly moved on, leaving the detectives and the grieving family in a silent void. The pressure from their superiors mounted, demanding results they simply couldn't deliver. The outsider theory, initially a speculative assumption, hardened into a communal belief fueled by fear and a desire to preserve the sanctity of their tight-knit neighborhood. It was easier to believe a stranger had snatched Lena May than to consider the possibility that evil could dwell among them. This narrative, while comforting in its simplicity, ultimately steered the investigation away from crucial internal dynamics. Vance often confided in Corbin that something felt off about the lack of disturbance, the lack of any significant struggle, as if Lena May had known her abductor. But without evidence, it was merely a gut feeling, a nagging discomfort that lingered in the back of her mind. Years bled into decades. The physical landscape of Conant Gardens shifted. Some neighbors moved away, others passed on. The bungalows, once vibrant, now showed signs of wear. Lena May's house stood empty for a time, eventually sold to a young family who knew nothing of the silent tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. The story of Lena May Jackson became a cautionary tale whispered among elders, a chilling reminder of the unknown terrors that could lurk just beyond the safety of one's own front door. Children grew up hearing about Miss Lena May, a spectral figure, a beloved memory shrouded in sorrow. The general consensus within the Black community was that an outsider, perhaps someone from a different part of the city, had committed the crime. Racial tensions, though often unspoken, were a simmering undercurrent in Detroit, and the idea of a predator from beyond their trusted circles was a comforting, albeit painful narrative. It allowed them to maintain the illusion of safety within their own community, to believe that their neighbors, their friends, their church family were above such unspeakable acts. In 2003, 21 years after Lena May vanished, a new cold case unit was established within the Detroit Police Department, fueled by advancements in forensic technology and a renewed commitment to justice for victims whose stories had been forgotten. Detective Calvin Hayes, a young, ambitious officer with a keen mind for detail, was assigned to review the Lena May Jackson file. The case, thick with yellowing reports and faded photographs, felt ancient, a relic from a different era. Hayes, however, approached it with fresh eyes, unburdened by the frustrations and biases of the original investigators. He noted the meticulousness of Corbin and Vance's initial work, appreciating the sheer volume of interviews and evidence gathered, even if it had yielded no arrests. Hayes's process was akin to that of an archaeological dig. He didn't just read the file, he dissected it. His small office, lit by the glow of multiple monitors, became a hub of digital forensics. He uploaded every handwritten note, every typed report, every grainy photograph into a sophisticated database, cross-referencing names, addresses, and dates. This digital approach, a luxury unknown to Vance and Corbin, allowed him to identify subtle connections and overlooked anomalies that had been buried in the sheer volume of physical paper. He spent weeks simply familiarizing himself with the Conant Gardens of 1982, poring over old city maps, census data, and newspaper archives to reconstruct the social landscape. He studied the limitations of the original investigation, not to criticize, but to understand what avenues remained unexplored due to technological or conceptual constraints. Hayes understood that cold cases weren't about finding new evidence in a conventional sense. They were about reinterpreting existing evidence through a new lens, equipped with modern science and a perspective unclouded by the initial emotional urgency and prevailing theories. He knew the department, still reeling from budget cuts and internal politics, viewed the cold case unit with a degree of skepticism, seeing it as a drain on resources. He had to prove its worth, and Lena Mae Jackson's case became his proving ground. He focused on the details that had always seemed anomalous: the slightly ajar door, the untouched house, the missing purse, but no other valuables. He cross-referenced names, looking for any connections that might have been overlooked. One name kept resurfacing, not as a suspect, but as a prominent, respected figure in the community: Deacon Elijah Eli Thornton. Deacon Thornton was a pillar of the St. Jude Missionary Baptist Church, a charismatic leader, and a man universally admired for his unwavering faith and tireless dedication to community service. He had organized food drives, mentored troubled youth, and often spoke eloquently at church services, his voice a comforting balm. He had been one of the most vocal proponents of the search for Lena Mae in 1982, offering comfort to her grieving family, speaking passionately at vigils, and tirelessly coordinating volunteer efforts. To the community, he was beyond reproach, a moral compass. Hayes discovered that Deacon Thornton had been among the last people to see Lena Mae at the church on the evening she disappeared, a fact corroborated by multiple witnesses, including Bea Washington. This wasn't suspicious in itself. Many people were at the church that evening. However, Hayes delved deeper into Thornton's initial statement from 1982. Thornton had stated he left the church around 7 p.m., just before Lena Mae. Yet Bea Washington distinctly recalled Lena Mae leaving around 7:15 p.m., after Thornton. A minor discrepancy, perhaps, but Hayes's gut told him to pull at that thread. He found an obscure detail in an old police report. A witness, a young boy named Marcus, then 8 years old, who lived across the street from Lena Mae, had told an officer that on the night of the disappearance, he saw a big car parked near Lena Mae's driveway around 7:30 p.m. He remembered hearing voices but couldn't make out what was being said, and then saw a shadow put something big in the trunk. Marcus had been dismissed by the original detectives as a child with an overactive imagination, his story too vague and contradictory to initial theories focusing on a struggle inside the house. Hayes, however, re-examined Marcus's original, faded drawing, a crude rendering of a large, dark sedan. What struck Hayes was a small, almost imperceptible detail in the drawing, a faint squiggle that, with a powerful magnifying glass, appeared to be a stylized C on the car's grille, perhaps a Cadillac. Deacon Thornton drove a dark blue Cadillac Coupe de Ville in 1982. This was a long shot, but it was enough to reignite the flickering embers of the cold case. Hayes quietly began to investigate Deacon Thornton. He pulled his old statements, reviewed his background. Thornton had no criminal record, a spotless reputation. However, a subtle pattern began to emerge. Thornton's wife, a quiet woman named Sarah, had passed away from natural causes in 1999. In Sarah's medical records, Hayes found a note from a doctor about Sarah having suffered from unexplained bruising in the late 1980s, which she attributed to clumsiness. A minor detail, Yet it suggested a potential for hidden aggression beneath Thornton's placid exterior. More chillingly, Hayes discovered that Deacon Thornton had inherited a significant sum of money from an estranged wealthy aunt in early 1982, an inheritance that Lena May, as a close friend of the aunt, was privy to. Lena May had often spoken to friends about the burden of wealth and the importance of stewardship, a philosophy she likely shared with Thornton, perhaps even offering advice on how to manage his newfound riches. Hayes needed more than circumstantial evidence. He sought out Marcus, now a grown man in his late 20s, struggling with his own demons, but willing to revisit the painful memory. The journey to Marcus was delicate. Hayes understood the profound impact of childhood trauma and the lingering fear Marcus must have felt. He approached Marcus with empathy and patience, not as a detective interrogating a suspect, but as someone offering a chance for a buried truth to finally surface. He met Marcus several times, not pressing for information immediately, but slowly building a rapport, assuring him that he was safe and that his voice, now as an adult, carried immense weight. Marcus, initially hesitant, eventually recalled more details under Hayes's gentle but persistent questioning. He remembered the man he saw that night. He had been Uncle Eli, the deacon. Marcus had been told by his mother to never bother adults, so he had quickly ducked back inside when he saw the deacon with Lena May. He hadn't thought much of it until the news of her disappearance broke. Then fear had frozen him. He feared reprisal if he named a respected figure, especially as a child. The trauma of the event, coupled with the pressure from adults who were searching for an outsider, had buried the memory deep. Marcus's recollection, though decades old, was incredibly vivid now that he was given a safe space to speak. He remembered seeing Deacon Thornton arguing, his voice low and angry, with Lena May by her car. He remembered Lena May's hands gesturing emphatically. Then a quick, violent motion, and Lena May was gone, slumped into the back seat of Thornton's large, dark Cadillac. The something big he had seen being placed in the trunk was Lena May's body, wrapped in a blanket. The missing purse, it was speculated, had been taken by Thornton to create the illusion of a robbery, a pathetic attempt to mislead investigators. The re-examination of Lena May's home in 2003, using advanced forensic techniques unavailable in 1982, finally yielded a breakthrough. A specialized luminol spray, designed to detect even minuscule traces of blood, was applied to the trunk of Lena May's Impala, which had been impounded and stored in a police evidence locker for 2 decades. The Impala's trunk, largely ignored in 1982 because it yielded no immediate clues and the focus was elsewhere, now fluoresced faintly in one corner, indicating the presence of dried human blood. A sample was carefully collected. DNA testing, revolutionary in 2003, confirmed it was Lena May Jackson's blood. This contradicted the original theory that Lena May had simply been abducted from her porch or the street. If her blood was in her own trunk, it suggested a struggle, or perhaps a desperate attempt to move her body or evidence, potentially before she was taken from the scene. This placed the initial incident closer to her car. The most damning piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. In 1982, during the initial search, police dogs had been brought in. While they had not found Lena May, one dog had exhibited unusual interest in a specific area of the church grounds, a secluded grove of old oak trees behind the fellowship hall. The handler had noted it, but without a specific scent or further indication, it was dismissed. Now, armed with Marcus's testimony and the blood evidence, Hayes revisited this detail. He theorized that if Thornton had used his Cadillac, he might have tried to dispose of something at the church, a place he frequented and knew well. A new search of that specific area of the church grounds was initiated using ground-penetrating radar. Deep beneath the roots of a colossal oak, a faint anomaly was detected. What they unearthed sent a shiver down the spines of the investigators. Lena Mae Jackson's purse. It was waterlogged, degraded by time and earth, but intact. Inside, among her personal effects, was a small, ornate silver locket she always wore, a family heirloom. Crucially, a single, clear fingerprint, remarkably preserved due to the purse's location and the type of soil, was lifted from the metal clasp. This print was immediately run through the newly established automated fingerprint identification system. The result was swift and devastating. The fingerprint belonged to Elijah Thornton. The climax was finally upon them. Hayes knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he had found the killer. But the realization brought with it a profound sense of dread. How do you tell a community that their beloved pillar of faith is a murderer? He meticulously prepared his case, double-checking every detail, anticipating the inevitable backlash. He sought out Detective Vance, who, though retired, had remained a respected figure within the department. Presenting his findings, Hayes watched her face, a roadmap of emotions playing out. Initial disbelief, then a dawning horror, and finally a fierce, protective glint in her eyes for the woman she had failed to bring justice to decades ago. Eli Thornton, she whispered, the name tasting like ash. It was always the ones you least suspect. Vance, her voice firm, vowed to support Hayes fully, offering her insights into Thornton's character from 1982, details that now took on a sinister new meaning. She remembered Thornton's almost too eager participation in the search parties, his theatrical grief at the vigils. Details that had once seemed admirable now appeared as chilling acts of deception. She recalled her own unease then, a fleeting suspicion that she dismissed, dismissing it as the desperate mind playing tricks. Now she understood the cold, calculated performance. Hayes then had the difficult task of confronting his superiors. The cold case unit, while innovative, was still somewhat an underdog within the larger department. Presenting a case against a deacon, a man with a sterling reputation, was not a step to be taken lightly. There was resistance, concern for community relations, and the sheer disbelief that such a respected figure could harbor such darkness. "Are you absolutely sure, Detective Hayes?" the chief had asked, his voice laced with caution. Hayes presented the evidence, Marcus's brave, detailed testimony, corroborated by his childhood drawing and the vehicle identification. The luminol detected blood in Lena Mae's own car trunk, finally proving a struggle took place at the vehicle. And the irrefutable fingerprint of Deacon Elijah Thornton on Lena Mae's purse buried deep within the church grounds. The evidence was a crescendo, building from a faint whisper to an undeniable roar. The room fell silent. The weight of the truth settled, heavy and cold. Meanwhile, in Conant Gardens, Deacon Thornton continued his life, seemingly unbothered. He led Sunday services, his voice resonating with spiritual authority, his hands clasped in prayer. He visited the sick, counseled the troubled, and comforted Lena Mae's still grieving family, offering words of hope and faith. He was a master of his own cruel charade, performing his role with chilling perfection, weaving himself deeper into the fabric of the community, even as the truth, like a relentless river, slowly eroded the ground beneath his feet. The inheritance Lena Mae had known about, the funds intended for the scholarship program, had indeed been largely diverted to prop up Thornton's own lavish lifestyle and a series of questionable investments, all discreetly hidden. He had lived for decades with this dark secret, the fear of exposure a constant, silent companion, driving his pious facade to greater extremes. The community had seen him as a beacon, never once questioning the subtle signs of his increasing wealth, attributing it to divine blessings rather than illicit gains. Thornton's psychological state during those 21 years was a complex tapestry of self-deception and calculated risk. He became an even more fervent churchgoer, a louder voice in the choir, a more generous donor. It was his penance, his shield, and his greatest act. He convinced himself that Lena May's death was an unfortunate accident, a tragic consequence of her stubbornness and his momentary lapse. He suppressed the memory of her desperate pleas, her eyes wide with recognition, choosing instead to remember her as an obstacle to his deserved prosperity. The fear of being caught was a constant, gnawing anxiety, manifesting in sleepless nights and an almost obsessive need for control. He would sometimes revisit the area near the river, a morbid pilgrimage, just to ensure the river had done its work, the secret still buried. The constant performance, the meticulous upkeep of his saintly image drained him, but the alternative, exposure and public humiliation, was far worse than any internal torment. He thrived on the admiration of his congregation, using their trust as an emotional fortress against his own guilt. He truly believed he was untouchable, protected by God and the community's unwavering faith. The police meticulously planned the arrest. The goal was to secure Thornton without incident, minimizing public spectacle, but ensuring the message was clear. They knew the community's reaction would be intense, a mixture of shock, anger, and a profound sense of betrayal. The news would ripple through every household, every church, every corner store. It would dismantle a perception, shattering the collective innocence built around a trusted figure. The arrest of Deacon Elijah Thornton on November 15, 2003, was a seismic shockwave that tore through the heart of Detroit's Black community, leaving a landscape of disbelief, anger, and profound sadness. The news spread like wildfire, carried by whispers and then blaring headlines. Beloved Deacon arrested in 1982 cold case murder. On that crisp autumn morning, under a sky as gray and heavy as the collective mood, two unmarked police cruisers pulled up to Thornton's modest home. Hayes, accompanied by a now retired but present Detective Vance, stepped out. Vance's face, etched with a mixture of vindication and sorrow, reflected the decades of unanswered questions. Thornton, then 75 years old, a man whose posture had always been ramrod straight, now looked frail, his shoulders stooped with the weight of an accusation he could no longer deflect. He answered the door, his expression initially one of polite confusion, then a flicker of raw, undisguised panic in his eyes as he saw the detectives, particularly Vance. The words, "Deacon Thornton, you're under arrest for the murder of Lena May Jackson," hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. Neighbors, alerted by the unusual presence of police, emerged from their homes, their faces a canvas of shock and horror. Children, on their way to school, paused, sensing the gravity, seeing the familiar Uncle Eli being led away in handcuffs. How could he, the man who had preached solace and community, the man who had wept openly at Lena May's vigil, be responsible for such a heinous act? The betrayal was too immense to comprehend. The entire community felt a deep, wrenching sense of having been violated, their trust shattered into a million pieces. Under interrogation, confronted with the overwhelming evidence, Marcus's testimony, Lena May's blood in her own car trunk, and, most damningly, his fingerprint on her unearthed purse, Deacon Thornton broke. The meticulous facade he had maintained for 21 years crumbled. His confession, delivered in a low, gravelly voice, was a chilling tale of greed and desperation. He admitted to confronting Lena May on the night of October 12, 1982. Lena May, a woman of strong moral convictions, had discovered that Thornton was siphoning funds from the inheritance he had received, meant for a scholarship program for underprivileged youth, funds he was meant to manage on behalf of his deceased aunt. she had confronted him, demanding he rectify the situation, threatening to expose his deceit to the church and the community if he didn't. Her words, "Elijah, you betray God and your community with every cent you steal from those children," had pierced through his carefully constructed piety, igniting a primal fear of public disgrace. The confrontation escalated rapidly by Lena May's Impala. She had just finished loading some church supplies into her trunk, ready to leave. Thornton approached her, his voice initially calm, trying to dismiss her concerns. But Lena May, seeing through his placating words, grew resolute. She mentioned specific account numbers, dates, and transactions, revealing the depth of her investigation into his financial dealings. She wasn't guessing, she knew. "I will not stand by, Elijah," she had declared, her voice firm, "while you tarnish your soul and steal futures. You must confess, or I will speak the truth." It was this unwavering moral stand, her refusal to be silenced, that sealed her fate. In a moment of panic and rage, fearful of losing his reputation, his standing, and the comfortable life he had grown accustomed to, Thornton had struck her, pushed her into her own car, and suffocated her with a blanket in the struggle. He recounted Lena May's last desperate gasps, her eyes wide with shock and hurt, not at a stranger, but at a man she had considered family. He described the morbid journey in his Cadillac, Lena May's body wrapped in a blanket in the trunk, the silence of the night amplifying his own pounding heart. He had driven to a secluded, overgrown area near the Detroit River, a spot he knew from solitary fishing trips, and there, under the cover of darkness, he had disposed of her body, burying it shallowly beneath tangled roots and river debris, believing the river itself would eventually claim and hide the evidence. He then meticulously cleaned his Cadillac, obsessively wiping down every surface. He returned to the church grounds to bury her purse, believing it would never be found, a desperate act to erase any connection. The decision to leave her car and stage a partial robbery was a clumsy, spur-of-the-moment attempt to divert suspicion. The missing purse was simply a detail he'd forgotten in his panic, and when he remembered, he knew he couldn't return to her house without drawing attention. The weight of his confession hung heavy in the interrogation room, a stench of evil finally released. The resolution of the Lena May Jackson cold case brought a complex mix of emotions to Conant Gardens. There was immense relief that Lena May's disappearance was finally explained, that her family finally had answers, and that justice, though agonizingly delayed, had finally arrived. Her remains were located in the remote area near the river, exactly where Thornton described, finally bringing her home to a proper burial. The funeral, held more than 2 decades after her vanishing, was attended by hundreds, a somber but healing ceremony that allowed the community to collectively grieve and say goodbye. The eulogy spoke not only of Lena May's enduring spirit, but also of the profound betrayal. The shock reverberated beyond Conant Gardens, touching every corner of the city, becoming a cautionary tale for families and church congregations alike. Local news channels ran continuous segments detailing the unraveling of a monstrous deception that had festered for decades. The story of Lena May and Deacon Thornton transcended a mere crime report. It became a deep psychological study of how communal trust could be exploited and how appearance could mask the most heinous of intentions. Yet, alongside the relief, there was a deep, aching wound. The revelation that Deacon Elijah Thornton, a man so deeply respected and trusted, could commit such a heinous act shattered the very foundations of trust within the community. It forced an uncomfortable introspection, a realization that evil could reside not just in the shadows of the unknown, but in the familiar faces of those closest to them. The collective innocence of a generation was irrevocably lost. Many struggled with anger, not just at Thornton, but at themselves, for having been so blind, for having placed such unwavering faith in a man capable of such depravity. Friendships were strained, families debated, and the very spirit of the Jude Missionary Baptist Church underwent a profound crisis of faith and identity. How could they reconcile the man who preached God's word with the man who took a life? For Lena May's family, the pain of knowing the killer was someone she loved and trusted added another layer to their grief, transforming a tragedy into a personal, agonizing betrayal. Marcus, now an adult, found a sense of closure, but the scars of his childhood trauma, the burden of a secret he carried, would remain. His courage, however, was hailed as a testament to the enduring power of truth. The aftermath in Conant Gardens was a period of intense reckoning. Church pews that were once filled with reverence now held a silent tension. Sermons focused on forgiveness and healing, but the wounds were too fresh, the questions too raw. Some parishioners left St. Jude, unable to reconcile the sacred space with the sacrilege that had occurred. Others stayed, determined to reclaim their faith and rebuild a trust that had been so brutally broken, seeking solace in shared grief and a commitment to transparency. Community leaders initiated discussions, painful but necessary, about vulnerability, hidden agendas, and the importance of holding even the most revered figures accountable. The myth of the outsider perpetrator was shattered, forcing the community to confront the uncomfortable truth that internal threats could be far more insidious. This introspection, while difficult, ultimately strengthened the community in new ways, fostering a deeper sense of discernment and resilience. It also served as a stark lesson for young Detective Hayes, reminding him that justice was not always clean or universally celebrated. Sometimes it tore open old wounds even as it healed others. Detective Vance, having witnessed the initial failure and now the eventual success, found a bittersweet peace. The case of Lena May Jackson had haunted her, but its resolution, however painful, finally allowed her to lay that ghost to rest. The tragedy of Lena May Jackson became a haunting parable of the corrosive power of greed and the terrifying duality of human nature. Her story underscored a chilling truth. Sometimes the monster isn't a stranger lurking in the dark, but a smiling face you see every Sunday. The case forever changed how the Black community of Detroit viewed its own internal dynamics, highlighting the need for vigilance even within sacred spaces. It ignited conversations about the subtle warning signs of hidden pathologies, the importance of questioning, and the devastating consequences of unchecked power and ambition cloaked in piety. The efforts of Detective Hayes, fueled by his unwavering commitment to justice, served as a beacon of hope, demonstrating that time, while a formidable adversary, could not extinguish the pursuit of truth. His work, supported by the original Detective Vance, brought a long overdue sense of peace, but at a tremendous cost. The legacy of Lena May Jackson lives on, not just as a victim, but as a symbol of the enduring fight for justice and the unwavering dedication of those who refuse to let the lost be forgotten. Her memory serves as a stark reminder that some mysteries, though eventually solved, leave behind scars that time can never fully erase. The community was stunned by the arrest, and that shock lingered, a perpetual echo in the heart of Detroit. And you, what do you truly believe motivated Deacon Thornton to commit such an unspeakable act against a woman he supposedly held in such high regard? Do you think the community could have ever truly healed without knowing the truth, or is some ignorance truly bliss? This cold case, decades in the making, leaves us pondering the dark corners of the human heart, suggesting that some mysteries, even when solved, remain forever shrouded in the chilling fog of what might have been. The resolution, while providing answers, also opened new questions about the nature of evil, the fragility of trust, and the enduring strength required to live with inconvenient truths. The trial of Elijah Thornton began in the spring of 2004, a mere 5 months after his arrest. The courtroom was packed daily, a somber congregation of Lena Mae's family, longtime Conant Gardens residents, and a curious public. The local media once again descended upon the story with ferocity, capturing every nuance of the proceedings. Assistant District Attorney Rachel Jenkins, a rising star known for her sharp intellect and compelling courtroom presence, led the prosecution. She was a woman in her late 30s with an intensity that commanded attention, her arguments precise and her delivery unwavering. Jenkins painted a vivid picture of a calculated betrayal, contrasting Thornton's public persona with his private depravity. She meticulously presented the evidence. Marcus's brave testimony, detailed and consistent, now validated by the adult he had become. The forensic evidence of Lena Mae's blood in her own car, and the undeniable fingerprint on the purse, a silent, damning witness unearthed from consecrated ground. The prosecution's case culminated in Thornton's own chilling confession, played for the jury. His gravelly voice admitting to the suffocating act, a sound that brought gasps and tears to the courtroom. The audio, stripped bare of the deacon's usual oratorical flourish, revealed a hollow, almost mechanical recounting of Lena Mae's last moments, a stark contrast to the benevolent figure so many had revered. Thornton's defense, led by a veteran public defender named Arthur Vance, no relation to Detective Vance, primarily attempted to discredit Marcus's decades-old memory, arguing it was a product of suggestion and youthful fantasy, colored by the intense media scrutiny of the arrest. Vance highlighted the time elapsed, suggesting the unreliability of childhood recollections, especially under pressure. They also challenged the chain of custody for some of the older evidence, implying contamination or misidentification in the 2 decades it sat in storage. The defense lawyers questioned the interpretation of the luminal results, implying it could be animal blood or an old stain unrelated to Lena Mae's disappearance. They presented Thornton as an elderly, respected man of God, incapable of such violence, suggesting the confession was coerced or the result of mental frailty under duress, a man pressured into saying what the police wanted to hear. During cross-examination, Arthur Vance attempted to portray Detective Hayes as an overly zealous young officer, desperate to make a name for himself by pinning a cold case on a prominent community figure. However, Detective Hayes, with the support of Detective Vance, who was present daily in the gallery, meticulously countered each defense argument. Hayes's fresh, detailed perspective on the cold case, combined with Vance's historical knowledge and the undeniable physical evidence, left little room for doubt. Hayes calmly explained the advancements in forensic science that allowed for the re-examination of old evidence and how Marcus's testimony, when revisited without external pressure, provided critical contextual details that aligned perfectly with the physical findings. He even brought in an expert on childhood trauma and memory who affirmed the possibility of repressed memories surfacing years later under safe conditions. The most poignant moment of the trial came when Lena Mae's granddaughter, Clara Mae Johnson, then in her early 40s, took the stand. Her voice, trembling with decades of suppressed grief and newly found anger, spoke of the gaping void Lena Mae's absence had left, the endless questions, the false hope, and the profound pain of growing up without her matriarch. Clara Mae, a woman who had inherited her grandmother's quiet dignity, recounted the countless holidays shadowed by an empty chair, the milestones Lena Mae never witnessed, the lessons she couldn't teach. She spoke directly to Thornton, her eyes blazing with a mixture of sorrow and righteous indignation. "You sat in our living room, Deacon. You held my hand at vigils, and you spoke of God's plan. all while you knew exactly where my grandmother was. How could you look us in the eye? Her testimony, a raw outpouring of human suffering, resonated deeply with the jury, painting Lena May not just as a victim, but as a vibrant, irreplaceable woman whose life was cruelly stolen by someone she trusted implicitly. The impact of her words was palpable, silencing the courtroom and visibly affecting even some members of the defense team. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 2 days. The weight of the evidence, coupled with the emotional testimony, proved insurmountable for the defense. The verdict, when it came, was a unanimous guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder. A collective sigh, heavy with both sorrow and relief, swept through the courtroom. Lena May's family members embraced, tears flowing freely, but these were tears not just of sadness, but of a long overdue acknowledgement and vindication. Justice had finally been served. Elijah Thornton, stripped of his deacon title and his facade of piety, showed no visible emotion as the verdict was read, his face a hardened mask. He was subsequently sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He died in prison a few years later, his final days marked by solitude and the stark reality of his crimes, a lonely end for a man who had craved admiration above all else, dying without the adulation he had so desperately sought to maintain. In Conant Gardens, the verdict brought a fragile peace, but also a new set of challenges. The community, once fiercely private, was now forced into a public examination of its values and its vulnerabilities. The St. Jude Missionary Baptist Church underwent a profound transformation. Its leadership, deeply humbled and shocked by the revelation, acknowledged the deep hurt and betrayal felt by the congregation. They instituted new transparency measures for all financial dealings, ensuring strict oversight and accountability. They also established community support groups and counseling services to help members process their grief, anger, and the crisis of faith that had rippled through their ranks. The church became a space not just for worship, but for healing, for honest dialogue about sin, forgiveness, and the human capacity for both good and evil. New leaders emerged, committed to rebuilding trust not just within the congregation, but throughout Conant Gardens, emphasizing accountability and communal introspection. The church's weekly prayer meetings now included specific prayers for discernment and for the healing of broken trust, moving forward with a renewed, albeit scarred, sense of purpose. For Lena May's family, the recovery was a long and arduous journey. The public acknowledgement of Thornton's guilt, while providing closure, also meant reliving the trauma in the public eye. They chose to channel their enduring love for Lena May into a positive force. They established the Lena May Jackson Scholarship Fund, using the very inheritance money that Thornton had attempted to steal, now managed by a transparent, community-led board composed of church elders and Lena May's relatives. This act of reclaiming Lena May's legacy from the shadows of Thornton's greed became a powerful symbol of resilience and hope for future generations in Conant Gardens, helping underprivileged youth achieve their educational dreams, a true testament to Lena May's original vision. Her proper burial, more than 2 decades after her disappearance, allowed for a final public mourning, a closing of a chapter that had remained agonizingly open for too long. Her gravesite, adorned with fresh roses from her beloved garden, became a place of quiet reflection, a testament to her enduring spirit and the community's unwavering love, visited regularly by family and friends who finally had a place to grieve. The Lena May Jackson cold case also had a lasting impact on the Detroit Police Department. Detective Hayes was lauded for his groundbreaking work, his dedication validating the crucial role of cold case units. The success of the investigation, coupled with the innovative use of modern forensics and digital cross-referencing, led to increased funding and resources for these specialized teams, forever changing how unsolved crimes were approached in Detroit. Hayes, though celebrated, remained humble, often crediting the original detectives, Corbin and Vance, and the community members like Marcus for their roles in finally uncovering the truth. His experience shaped his career, instilling in him a profound understanding of the deep, intergenerational wounds that unsolved crimes could inflict and the redemptive power of delayed justice. He went on to lead the cold case unit, becoming a mentor for new detectives, always emphasizing the importance of empathy and persistence. Detective Vance, now a quiet observer, dedicated her retirement to volunteering with organizations that supported victims of violent crime and their families. She spoke at police academies, sharing the lessons learned from the Lena Mae Jackson case, emphasizing the importance of following instincts, revisiting cold leads with fresh eyes, and never underestimating the power of small, overlooked details. She found a measure of closure, not just for Lena Mae, but for her own professional conscience, knowing that the ghost that had haunted her for decades was finally at peace, and that her initial instincts, though unproven then, had ultimately been validated. The story of Lena Mae Jackson remains a haunting parable in Detroit, a constant reminder that the most insidious evils can masquerade behind the most benevolent faces. It forced the Black community of Conant Gardens to confront uncomfortable truths about internal threats, the corrosive nature of unchecked ambition, and the fragility of trust. It was a painful, necessary reckoning that ultimately strengthened their bonds, fostering a deeper sense of discernment and an enduring commitment to protect their sacred spaces and their collective soul. The echoes of Lena Mae's name, once whispered in sorrow, are now spoken with a newfound reverence, a testament to the power of truth and the unwavering pursuit of justice, no matter how many years it takes. Her memory continues to inspire, a beacon against the darkness, reminding us that even in the face of profound betrayal, hope for healing and justice will always prevail.